Happy Tuesday, everyone. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Anita here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. It's been a busy morning. Let's get to your top stories this afternoon. Well, after months and months of Surrey's policing saga, is it finally over? Well, after a failed attempt to challenge the province in court, it looks like Surrey's Mayor Brenda Locke will no longer oppose the transition to a municipal force. Now, in a video of last night's City Council meeting, it's posted online, Locke said she accepts the province's decision, but said it's not in the best interest of taxpayers. She's still disappointed with the judicial review. And on the early edition this morning, Surrey City Councillor Linda Annis welcomed the mayor's comment, eager to put aside the dispute to bed. And here's what else Councillor Annis thinks the mayor should do.
The mayor just needs to get on board and quit stalling and delaying and having any further delaying tactics. This is not good for the residents of Surrey. That's who elected us. It's not our personal money. It's taxpayers' money, and she shouldn't be, footing it away. We need to be much more responsible with it. And I think what she needs to do is moving forward is be fully cooperative with this transition.
Locke says she's committed to keep tabs on how those costs add up, and she's also calling for more transparency on the transition. And Vancouver police say they have made a substantial drug bust after focusing on an organized crime group. They say the 14th-month operation targeted a group called Zone 43. It was based in Quebec and now has operations in Vancouver. The department says officers executed 5 search warrants and made a massive seizure.
Investigators have recovered more than 24 kilograms of illicit drugs, including 7 kilograms of fentanyl, 11 kilograms of cocaine, 2 kilograms of methamphetamine, and 4 kilograms of cutting agents, including toxic benzodiazepines.
Heard says police also recovered $150,000 in cash. 5 men have been arrested and the investigation is still going on. And in New Westminster, City Council voted to beef up renters' protections. It means tenants will be able to return to rebuilt units at the same rent they were paying before.
Tenants are valuable members of our community that we can't afford to lose, just like they can't afford to lose our housing. The best case scenario is that tenants are not displaced in the first place. The next best that we have power over is that they can return at the same rate under which they left.
The motion passed unanimously, and city staff will come back to council with the new renter protections. This all comes as the province has encouraged more density around those transit hubs. And Parks Canada says a white grizzly bear known as Nakota and her 2 cubs are dead in separate collisions on the Trans-Canada Highway. Nakota was found dead on Saturday after a crash with a vehicle. She likely died because of her injuries. And we also know that Parks Canada says the crash happened just 12 hours after her 2 cubs were killed on the highway as well on Thursday. The statement says its staff were repairing wildlife fencing and then they saw the mother bear startle at a train and run into traffic. And also, after 18 months, the Museum of Anthropology at UBC will reopen this Thursday. There has been seismic upgrades to protect the collections, and displays and gallery spaces have also been revitalized in collaboration with First Nation communities, so something to check out. And that's it for us. I'm Anita. You're watching CBC News BC. Stay with us. BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Premier David Eby has come out swinging against Ottawa. He says BC has been left out of funding for housing new residents, while federal money has flown to Ontario and Quebec, coming, quote, at the expense of the West. Do you think BC is getting its fair share to deal with housing and temporary migrants? And Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke says she accepts the Surrey policing transition. We're going to get reaction, plus more of your tips on doing the grouse grind. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app and on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page. You can call us now on our top story this hour. Do you think BC is getting its fair share from Ottawa? And what do you think of Ottawa's criticism, of David Eby's criticism, rather, of Ottawa's support for Ontario and Quebec? This is to deal with immigration pressures. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone or email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, the federal government this week pledged $750 million to Quebec to help pay for a surge in temporary residents. Premier François Legault had been lobbying Ottawa for money to make up for what it spent on social services to support migrants. It's welcome news for that province, but here in BC, Premier David Eby is livid. He gave this reaction yesterday at the Western Premiers Conference.
They've offered us nothing, $0. With 10,000 people coming to our province every 37 days, we have right now refugees and homeless shelters. We have international students grappling with a lack of supports in the community. We've had to take really significant steps. And so to see a single province agreement with Quebec is an underlining of a sense of frustration that I heard around the table. And I won't put this on anyone else, but I'll say for British Columbia, how frustrated we are to see the money being showered down on Quebec and Ontario, and us scrabbling around for what's left over. It's not acceptable. It is not okay. And part of the pressure that these young people are seeing is a lot of federal resource, time and energy, money, tax credits, effort going to those two provinces at the expense, in my opinion, of the West. And it needs to change. That announcement today with Quebec, frankly, is the straw that broke this camel's back. I cannot understand why we cannot get a per capita share. And I look forward to the call from the Prime Minister to share with us the details of their immigration funding for British Columbia on a per capita basis, the exact same as Quebec got today.
That's Premier David Eby speaking yesterday as the Western Premiers Conference wrapped up. Well, his tone is markedly different from what we heard back in February. At the time, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Vancouver to announce $2 billion in federal support for housing in BC, the BC Builds project. And here's Premier Eby on February 20th.
I want to thank the Prime Minister personally for his leadership in recognizing that this model is transformational. What the Prime Minister has announced today, $2 billion in additional funding for the BC Builds program, will be transformational for thousands of families, and it is growing massively today. Prime Minister, thank you to you and the federal government for stepping up in this way.
That's David Eby back in February. So two different issues, two very different tones. We're asking what you think. Do you think BC gets its fair share of support from Ottawa on funding for temporary migrant support? What do you think of Eby's harsh words for Ottawa's funding for Ontario and Quebec? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email, we're at bctoday@cbc.ca. In about 20 minutes from now, we'll hear from a Richmond City Councillor about what they're seeing in terms of newly arrived refugees in the city staying at the city's shelters. And we're also going to hear from a group that works with refugee claimants who have just arrived in Vancouver. So we're going to hear that interview coming up in about 20 minutes from now. Right now, we are taking your calls. You can give us a call on the open line. And joining us to talk more about this and perhaps the political context is SFU Senior Lecturer in Political Science, Sanjay Jaran. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
What did you think of the tone there from Premier Eby?
Yeah, obviously you've outlined it well. I think that it's definitely markedly different than the tone the Premier has taken with regards to the federal government in recent times. And he doesn't take a political scientist to know that David Eby at the moment stands alone amongst, if you just consider the four Western premiers ideologically closer to that of Justin Trudeau's government. And so they generally be seen as allies. And that really changed with that statement, at least, unless there is some walk back or some sort of context given by Eby. It was a pretty strong statement. And I guess that it sort of shows his frustration, sort of aligning himself with the other Western premiers on this issue, even though it's not necessarily their issue because they don't necessarily have the same share of refugees coming to their province, but still putting it in the context of Western Canada, not even saying specifically BC, really harkens back to an older narrative that we've seen in the past in British Columbia that puts British Columbia part of the West sort of being ignored by Ottawa, that recently has been not present in political discourse, where BC has sort of been on the outside, and Alberta, Saskatchewan, and sometimes Manitoba, particularly Alberta, Saskatchewan, have been more of a united front against the federal government. So it's definitely a change of political tone. Right,
that Western alienation sentiment that we've talked about in the past. Do you see any of that here?
Certainly is there. I think in some ways, if you're trying to really extrapolate the sort of political underpinnings of what he's saying, as an election is coming up, it's always the case that British Columbia is a bit more of a unique case than, say, Alberta, but there is always political capital to be gained from pitting the federal government against your province in the West, even in British Columbia to a great extent. And, I'm not accusing David Eby of playing politics with this. It sounds like he's genuine frustrations for genuine reasons, but certainly I don't think strategists within the NDP are not noticing that, given that a lot of people would see Eby and Trudeau as aligned ideologically and politically, and given the low approval of Trudeau, is that probably distancing himself in some way is not going to hurt him. If anything, it may benefit him when the next election rolls around.
Coming up in just a few months from now, when it comes to the provincial election anyway. There was some response today from Immigration Minister federally Mark Miller, and his response to Premier Eby's comments said they're not necessarily accurate. He says the disproportionate flow of asylum seekers has in fact occurred in Quebec and Ontario. If you look by population, BC has had fewer. It doesn't mean that they are not entitled to assistance from the federal government when they see their numbers go up. But he says, I think there was some confusion on the Premier's behalf as to what this money was for. The suggestion was it was for temporary residents. That is absolutely not the case. It is to compensate Quebec for 2 fiscal years of costs they've incurred with respect to the disproportionate flow of asylum seekers. So making the distinction there, Premier Eby was talking yesterday about refugees having to stay in shelters here because of lack of housing. He talked about the pressures and the lack of supports that international students face when they get here, and some of the changes that BC has had to make here because of that. But what the federal immigration minister is saying that this money is specifically to deal with asylum seekers. When you think of that, generally, immigration, housing, you talk about an election coming up. How much are those issues going to weigh in the upcoming provincial and federal election next year?
I mean, they might, depending, and I think federally, they certainly might. But let's stick to the provincial for a second. Mm-hmm. Immigration hasn't really been a hot button issue outside of its relationship to the housing market in British Columbia in recent times. This certainly could change that if this topic, if this issue continues to have legs in the media, and if David Eby responds to Mark Miller in a way that is continually sort of combative. Because what we know is that trying to put this in simple terms, I mean, immigration policy is complex because there's so many different streams. Right. And for the most part, the public doesn't necessarily differentiate between the different streams. And especially when it comes to housing, it's not always that clear as to what specific stream is going to have the biggest impact on housing shortages and other social services that we're always concerned about. And so for Miller to make that distinction, he's sort of muddying the waters, I think. He's presenting a defense, but it's not going to clarify anything for most people, because the idea that we can know for sure, or anyone's going to have access to the idea or the numbers about, well, the percentage of asylum seekers versus other kinds of entrants to Quebec is this much higher than British Columbia's. it's just too much. It's too complex to make a effective political argument. So I think, I guess to answer your question simply, it really depends on what Eby says next with regard to this issue, because I'm sure that right now that they're looking in terms of BC's distribution and whether or not that is sort of an accurate reflection. Is it indeed that asylum seekers are really not part of the stream of migrants coming to British Columbia? I doubt that's true, but we don't know. I don't know exactly what percentage. And then whether or not that compensation is actually mathematically logical according to that, which again, I can't tell you, but it really, we're going to be interesting to see what the response is.
Let's take a call. We are asking you, in light of these harsh words, tough criticism from Premier David Eby on federal funding going to Quebec to deal with supports for temporary migrants and asylum seekers, $750 million announced this week. Premier David Eby saying BC needs to get the same deal. Given the pressures from immigration here. And so we're asking for your thoughts. Do you think BC gets a fair share of that federal support? And what do you make of the Premier's harsh criticism of Ottawa? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Debbie is calling us from Courtney. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Debbie. Are you there? Okay, I think we have lost our connection with Debbie. Jennifer is calling us from Agassiz. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi there.
Hi. What are your thoughts today?
Well, all I gotta say is I'm of a generation where we had idioms like the proof is in the pudding, and all I can say is that if there weren't enough places for the people already living here to rent, how does it make sense to bring in hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of more people and then expect them to find somewhere to live? We don't have enough housing for the people that were already here and already here looking for work. Here's the thing about looking for work. You can't get a job if you don't have a job, and you can't get a job if you don't have a place to live. If you can't afford to live in a place, then you're going to be living in your car. Prime example, being a person with disabilities. Mm-hmm. I was born with disabilities. I refused to go on disability. I said, if I can get out of bed, I can go to work. That's how I was raised. So I always went to work because I could always get out of bed until the day I couldn't get out of bed. Then I had to go on disability. Then I was able to go back to work just enough to get into a car payment. And now I have to, where I'm living, my rent will go up by $200 in July and August. And I have to give up my pad rent and hope it'll be available in the winter. Otherwise, I'm going to be living in my vehicle until such a time that I can find full-time work that will accommodate my disabilities. And maybe then, if I can find work for in the mid-20s or more, I am a Class 1 truck driver. So
you're in a tough. Where do you think you might go?
Where? At what time?
To live.
Oh, when I give up my rent, I'm going to be living in my vehicle because it's. I was also. I asked my dad for a piece of advice when I was a kid. I said, and he told me. I said, "Do you have any advice for when I grow up?" Because and he said, "Well, if you have to choose between making your rent or making your car payment, he says, always make your car payment." And I said, "Well, but I need somewhere to live." And he goes, "Exactly. You can always live in your car, but you can't drive your house to work."
Oh, wow. Jennifer, thank you very much pointing to that added pressure on housing. And we know that, recently Ottawa capped the intake of international students per year. And this was part of its measures when it comes to international students and the pressures on housing as well. I hope you are able to find a resolution. Thanks so much for calling, Jennifer. Kelly is on the line now from Vancouver. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, longtime resident, born and raised in Vancouver, still living here. I've seen lots of changes, and You know, I'm a driver. I'm a truck driver, and I've never seen any improvements on the Highway 1 heading out. It's just it's a bunch of nonsense. By the time they fix it, I'm going to be retired. The Dees Island Tunnel. There's all kinds of federal help that they could be doing besides housing, and they just seem to do whatever they want to us. And I don't consider them a friend. I don't consider the federal government a friend. I consider them an enemy.
Okay, and so what do you make of what David Eby had to say then?
Well, I really like what he said because it's overdue. That's so overdue because that's the way it's been since I've been living in Canada. That the federal government does whatever it wants to do to us, and we don't vote on anything. Let's start with the removal of the ensign when 1965, when we fought under world wars under that flag. The government just came in and took it.
Okay.
And then it just follows. Everything else follows. We've flipped over to the metric system.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
come on, it just
That's
doesn't
a lot of frustration I hear from you, Kelly, and it sounds like a slew of issues, including the metric system, but essentially saying feeling abandoned, I guess would be the summation of that, right? Feeling abandoned by the federal government. You hear the frustration there on housing as well from Jennifer, Professor Joram. You said it kind of depends now in terms of where this goes on what the response will be from Premier David Eby and that funding that he's calling for. Do you see this as public posturing? Does public posturing generally get results?
Well, I mean, if we look in the case, if we look in the case of Quebec, to some extent, one could make the argument that it does, right? Is that so? Legault's response to the agreement was, I'm quoting from him here: "We'll take the money, but we'll continue to ask for more." Right? At the same time, the province of Quebec has recently struck a committee to look for ways to maximize their autonomy while adhering to the Constitution. Why I'm saying this is that what is going on here is that this interplay between, let's say, Quebec at this moment, British Columbia's David Eby and the federal government, it's within the confines of the Constitution, right? Is that Eby's asking for more funding based on what's given by the province, but he's not asking for a modification to federal rules on asylum, right? We're getting into bigger issues, as both callers are talking about, the sort of the consequences of a lack of sort of federal monies coming to BC in a general sense. But at its core, what he's asking for is he's not questioning the federal government's authority to set the rules on asylum, and it is not questioning British Columbia, the fact that British Columbia has no authority to decide whether or not asylum seekers can claim asylum and sort of have their cases processed in British Columbia. Right? That's federal jurisdiction. So this is I guess I'm just really pointing this out because this is really the kind of larger challenges of a federal system where people the nuance is missed, and we blame the federal government and people blame the provinces, and they sort of pass the buck back and forth, and the public is not necessarily going to be aware of who does what, but just want things to be done that suit that help them, right? And so I think it's honestly on politicians sometimes, especially between premiers and the federal government, to be more clear with the public about who has responsibility for what, and what is possible, and then sort of to have a debate framed that way so that they don't just sort of turn it into political fodder, that they can sort of pass the buck to each other. Anyways, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It's good to have you kind of wade through and sort through it all with us. I'm guessing we're going to need more of that over the coming months. Thank you so much for your time now.
You're welcome.
Sanjay Jaram is a senior lecturer in political science at SFU. 12:26 now, Pacific time. We are getting some emails from you as well on this. If you'd like to send us your thoughts, bctoday@cbc.ca is our address. And John writes us, speaking as an expat Albertan, what I've noticed is the strong ideological issues people here have with Alberta blinds them from the real problems created in Ottawa. This sounds just like your enemy's enemy bandwagon every time someone here actually notices that the Liberals are an Ontario or Quebec-centric party. This is not breaking news, people. Scott writes, a large portion of housing demand comes from foreign students at universities with no associated place to stay. Why don't universities have distance learning for foreign students so they can stay at home and gain Canadian education? Thank you very much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca, once again, is our email address. And coming up, we are going to learn a bit more about refugee claimants. This is something that Quebec has been saying they've been dealing with in terms of asylum seekers. But we're going to hear specifically what refugee claimants here in BC face when it comes to housing and shelters. So we are going to hear from Richmond City Councillor Carol Day. They have been seeking federal funding as well for their shelters, which are seeing an influx of refugees. And we're going to hear from a group that works with refugee claimants to help them through the process here in BC and to help them navigate the support system as well. That's coming up in our next half hour. We're talking about federal funding that has just been announced for Quebec, $750 million to help them pay for supports needed for a surge in asylum seekers and temporary residents. That's something they have been calling for. Meanwhile, Premier David Eby says BC needs the same thing, given temporary residents arriving here as well. Meanwhile, the federal immigration minister responding saying, well, let's not confuse. Those are apples and oranges in terms of what Quebec is dealing with and what BC deals with in terms of new arrivals. And we're taking your calls, asking you, do you think BC is getting its fair share from Ottawa? And what do you think of the tough tone from the Premier here? Debbie is our next caller now in Courtenay. Hi, Debbie.
Hi there. Yeah, I was kind of saying what some of the others have said too. The Liberals in Ottawa, they're concerned, especially with this next election coming up, about votes in Ontario and Quebec. And it's really easy to appease Quebec and Ontario by giving them more money and more things and get the votes so that the rest of us, our votes don't really count. But whether it's David Eby or the Conservatives who win in October, it's going to be an issue that absolutely BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, we all deserve the right proper funding. And there is absolutely no way that Mark Miller can say that the reason Quebec's getting this much money is because the amount of asylum seekers. They're not getting so many asylum seekers that they need that much money over the rest of the provinces. So yeah, unfair again, and of course our votes don't matter, so they won't pander to what we need in the West.
Debbie, thank you very much. Glad we got you back on the line. That's Debbie joining us from Courtenay. You take care. We're going to take more of your calls as well on this topic coming up in our next half hour. And at about quarter to the hour Pacific time, we are going to get some reaction to the news out of Surrey, with Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke saying yesterday that she still disagrees with the transition to, she calls it provincially mandated transition to Surrey police service. But that she accepts the transition. She's made those comments, so we'll get some reaction to that as well coming up in about 15 minutes from now. Right now it is 12:30 Pacific time. This is BC Today on CBC. We're on radio, CBC television, live streaming as well on YouTube and on the CBC News app. I'm Michelle Elliott. We'll be back with you coming up after the CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Police say a 15-year-old boy is dead after an ATV accident Sunday in Barrier. RCMP say the boy was driving, carrying a passenger when he lost control and the vehicle overturned. Investigators say it appears the teen was not wearing a seatbelt. The passenger suffered minor injuries. As we've been hearing on the show, the federal immigration minister says Premier David Eby may have been confused when he criticized Ottawa's $750 million immigration deal with Quebec. Eby said it was frustrating that BC was offered nothing, but Minister Mark Miller says the money for Quebec was to compensate that province for 2 years of high costs associated with a disproportionate number of asylum claimants. Government statistics show 65% of asylum claimants arrived in Quebec last year, compared with just under 2% here in BC. And after years of fighting, Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke has accepted the Surrey Police Service will be the city's police force. Her comments follow last month's BC Supreme Court decision, which quashed Locke's attempt to stop the transition. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Periods of rain this afternoon with a high of 13. Highs reaching 17 with a chance of showers in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a high of 16 with showers and a risk of thunderstorms. Highs up to 25 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a chance of showers and thunderstorms with a high of 23. And cloudy this afternoon in the Fraser Valley. A bit of sunshine in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria. Windy in some areas with highs around 16. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob. I like your shirt. It's got flowers on it.
It does.
Yeah. I'm in a very, very much a flower kind of mood. My roses are blooming. It's spring, and the rain can only help, so I don't complain about that. But yeah, I love seeing springtime blooms. Like on your shirt. Yeah. I think, Rob's, are you okay? You're turning around.
No. Yeah, I'm fine. I was just checking the weather. It looks good.
It looks
no
fine.
Rain.
No rain right now.
I like to complain about the rain. You don't? I'm happy to.
I don't. Just the rain?
That's right. Just the rain. That's the only thing I'll complain about. That's right.
No complaints about your shirt.
Great.
Very nice. Okay. Thanks so much,
Right,
Rob.
sure.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today, and lots more, of course, on your day's top stories coming up throughout the day here on CBC and on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver. Here's Amy Bell telling us what's coming up on the Coast.
Hi, Michelle. It is Amy Bell sitting in once again for Gloria here on the Coast. So we're continuing our week-long series about the life and legacy of Arthur Erickson. Of course, his mark on architecture across the city can be seen, but one of the most famous of his works is the Museum of Anthropology. So we're going to be exploring that later on the show. We're also going to talk about tree canopies. And I know today isn't hot and sunny, but when we have extreme heat, trees are incredibly important for keeping cities cool. So we're going to hear from Vancouver and New Westminster about their tree strategies. On the Coast is on the air every weekday starting at 3, and I hope you'll be listening.
I will. See, tree canopies, flowers. We'll take them all. Amy, thank you very much. We'll tune in this afternoon at 3 o'clock in Metro Vancouver. Well, some tough talk yesterday from BC Premier David Eby, who's demanding similar funding for BC as what's just been announced for Quebec to deal with temporary migrant pressures. Now, Eby said that funding, $750 million announced this week, comes at the expense of Western provinces. And he was speaking at the end of the Western Premiers Conference yesterday. Now, we've been taking your calls on this. Is BC getting its fair share to deal with temporary migrants? What do you think of the tough talk from BC's Premier to Ottawa? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can also email your thoughts to bctoday@cbc.ca. And again, the response from Immigration Minister Mark Miller today to Premier Eby's comments was that they are two separate issues. He says, I think first and foremost, the disproportionate flow of asylum seekers has in fact occurred in Quebec and Ontario, and BC has had fewer. So the suggestion, he says, I think perhaps there was some confusion on the Premier's behalf as to what this money was for. The suggestion was that it was for temporary residents. That is not the case. It is to compensate Quebec for 2 fiscal years of costs they've incurred with respect to the disproportionate flow of asylum seekers. Okay, so that comment coming from the federal immigration minister in response today. I'm taking your calls and seeking your comments too. And Brandy is calling us from Horsefly in the Caribou. Hi, Brandy.
Hi there. I already said to someone what I was going to say, but I'll repeat it. I was listening to Sanjay and you, and I felt Sanjay had some very good points. but I also had feelings for Eby because we in BC and Alberta have bowed to the Eastern Canada and the expenses that go there because of their population, and we're not as populated. But we have real problems here because our frustration is not just what's happening with the immigrants and the refugees, because we're all for supporting them here in BC. I was born here, I'm 84, and I've seen the infrastructure that we should have had put in our area, in our province, never happened. And that's not just the infrastructure for housing and plumbing and water, but also for our health care and other things. And if we don't have infrastructure and the facilities to accept people, we shouldn't be accepting them, because we have a problem ourselves living in BC where a lot of people born here don't have what we need. And that's very short-sighted of all of the politicians that I've seen through my lifetime in British Columbia. I feel that the politicians, I know they want to win, and they start rolling the dice at election time, and they start handing out money. So I feel I've said enough.
Okay.
I don't want to keep anyone on the line or off it.
Brandy, thank you very much. Good to hear from you. And the point there that it's very much welcome immigrants and refugees, but is the infrastructure there first of all? Must plan ahead. The point there from our caller. And let's go to some new guests now. Now, earlier, as she mentioned, we heard about the politics of this. Right now, let's hear about the reality for refugees arriving in BC. I'm joined now by Carol Day, who is a Richmond City Councillor, and Lauren Beliski is Director of Engagement for Kinbrace, and that's a group that provides support for refugee claimants in BC. Good afternoon to both of you. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Thank you.
Lauren, I'll ask you first. Tell us about your work and what do refugees face here? We heard from Premier Eby about refugees staying in homeless shelters. I know that's something that Richmond has been dealing with and facing and seeing on the ground. From your perspective, what are they faced with upon arrival?
Yeah, so Kinbrace, the community here, we provide housing and support for refugee claimants. We started in 1998, and we're the first community that really began to address the housing issues of refugee claimants. And so over the years, we've just seen increasing number of refugee claimants arriving and a very slow response on the ground in general to the needs. So just for perspective, 10 years ago, there were about 700 refugee claimants who arrived in BC. And in 2023, we had 7,700, so a tenfold increase. And so refugee claimants, unlike other government-assisted or privately sponsored refugees, have nobody to meet them at the airport when they arrive or when they come across at a land border. They're basically coming unannounced on their own quest for safety. And so this creates a real dilemma for them because they have no connections, they have no often have run out of resources, and so many of them do end up in our shelter system and just really seeking to survive and find their next step as they seek their protection here in Canada.
And that is something, Carol Day, that you are seeing in Richmond. Tell us about the challenges there.
Yeah, on average, we have 33% of our shelter beds filled with asylum seekers and refugees. And that means that seniors who often become homeless have nowhere to go. So they're sleeping in a tent in a park because there's no room for them.
Well, what is it that you have been asking for? You, locally as a municipality have been lobbying the federal government directly.
Yeah, and actually, I'm involved in a task force for homelessness, and we've had MPs, MLAs, and people from various levels of government that we've been working with. And the key is to get the funding for the refugees and asylum seekers, because the thing is, they come here ready to work. A lot of them don't have mental health issues, and all they need is a place to live so they can get going with their lives. They're easy to place. And when you've got a number coming from one country, it's easy to put them together in groups. And if you do that, the housing is more affordable because they're sharing the rent.
Okay. What have you heard from what are you asking for specifically?
Well, I'd like them to build the housing. So I've been talking a lot to MP Parm Bains, who's been advocating for Richmond, and he's trying to get us the funds so that we can get moving forward with this. And what I personally would like to see, I don't speak for council, is some temporary modular housing built potentially on YVR land, and we can have that up in a matter of 6-7 months and get them housed. And then that housing can always be repurposed at a later date. But
and that's federal land, is it? The airport land?
Yeah, at the Sea Island. And so like right now, we already have 2 modular housing units. Each one houses 40 people. And they're very successful in the province, put those up in a matter of months. And we were able to get people off the street and get them into secure housing. Well, I'd like to see the feds do exactly the same thing. Put in modular housing, and they go directly there from the airport or from the border crossing, because it's not fair that they're spending 2-3 months in a shelter and not getting the support that they need.
What does that mean for a refugee claimant, Lauren? Not getting that support. What impact does that have, on proceeding with a claim, on if that claim is approved, settlement, and as Carol Day was saying, the prospect to work, which is what they would like to do.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've seen over the years is that refugee claimants who are supported really well from the beginning, they get on their own 2 feet and they're on their way in a much faster way than people who are kind of left falling through cracks or don't get the housing they need or the support that they need. And so upfront support such as housing, transitional housing, moving them on to permanent housing, all the settlement supports that they need, the community support, it makes a huge difference. And getting the work permit as quickly as possible. Right now, the whole immigration system is kind of grinding into a slower and slower pace. And so refugee claimants are stuck kind of in limbo at the front end of the process, which is really detrimental to their mental health and to all the possibility that they come with in terms of that they carry in their own beings. They're survivors. They've made it this far. They've left very traumatic situations. We hold them back in many ways by not giving them meeting their basic needs right off the top.
Do you think the Premier is right to demand this funding then, Lauren?
I think so. Yeah, if we need to look at it proportionately, refugee claimants get very little support. There's no federal support for their settlement needs. And the province picks up a piece of that settlement need. We'd love to see settlement support and housing support, transitional housing built for refugee claimants. If we just look at sheer numbers, BC received 7,700 refugee claimants last year, which is about 5% of the total number of claims in Canada, 144,000. And so I did a quick math here. It would be about 37 million that would come to the province in proportion to what Quebec has just received. And that would be a huge amount of money to help take some major steps to help refugee claimants.
Okay, we'll follow up on that figure then as well. Thank you so much to both of you for your time and giving us this picture as well from the ground. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol Day is a Richmond City Councillor, and Lauren Belitsky is Director of Engagement for Kinbrace that supports refugee claimants in BC. Let's take some more calls here. Craig is on the line from Mission. What are your thoughts on Premier Eby's demand for funding for temporary migrants, Craig?
Well, I had a couple of thoughts. Of course, the one people have sort of mentioned is it always reminds me of the Field of Dreams where they say, build it and they will come. But our federal government has sort of invited a lot of people without having the infrastructure in place first. So to me, that's a problem. But my mother used to work for the federal government most of her life, and she always used to tell me the squeaky wheel gets greased. And I know I I mentioned earlier to the lady when I first called in that I remember seeing a documentary from 10, 20 years ago, and I guess this is a regular occurrence in Canada when they were raising student fees across the country. And in Quebec, I believe it was tens of thousands of students showed up in Montreal to protest the fee hikes. And the documentary, maybe it was even a CBC documentary, went across Canada to show the student response. And in Vancouver, 3 or 4 people marched with a megaphone, and they showed them going by a coffee shop, and the people sitting in the coffee shop looking at them and saying, you know, what are those weirdos on about, right? And
So
Quebec did not get those hikes, but the rest of Canada did.
Based on again, as you say, the squeaky wheel. Craig, thank you very much for the
protests.
And protests, exactly.
Willingness to protest and band together.
Squeaky wheel of protesting. Yeah, Craig, thank you very much for the call. I do have to go on to Ryan in Vancouver. My apologies for jumping in there. Hi, Ryan.
Hi there. I'll be quick. I think that David Eby's comments kind of smack of insincerity. I think the party's been in power for quite a long time, and we haven't heard anything from him until he's now staring down the barrel of actually having to fight an election. And all of a sudden, we're getting some big talk from him. I don't think the federal government cares much about the West. Like, we've got a government that has said they don't care about financial policy. You guys, you know, your guests have said we're at 140,000 refugee claimants this year. We're building less than 250,000 homes in this country a year. I think that we really need to consider looking after the country before we start bringing in more and more people, even though our hearts are in the right place. If you try to rescue someone while they're drowning and they're flailing, they can bring you down and kill you too. And I think that that's where we're at in our country is we want to help, but I don't know that we can right now.
Ryan, thank you for your call. That's Ryan from Vancouver. A lot more of your emails coming in. We'll get to them as well later on in the program. Thanks so much to all our callers and all our guests as well. 12:48 Pacific time now. And another big story that has been ongoing and seems to have taken a turn. Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke has broken her silence on the BC Supreme Court decision to uphold the province's changes to the Provincial Police Act. She said that while she is disappointed by the justice's decision that cleared the way for that transition from the Surrey RCMP to the Surrey Police Service, she accepts the decision.
That I continue to believe that this NDP-imposed transition is not in the best interest of the residents or the taxpayers of the City of Surrey. The provincial report recognized that the RCMP have provided safe and effective policing for the City of Surrey, and the Solicitor General has stated that the city has safe and effective policing with the RCMP. He is taking this action, as he said, in the interest of the province. And while I'm disappointed by the outcome of the judicial review, I accept the decision, and we are moving forward with what the city needs to do to ensure that our residents are prioritized with the provincially legislated police transition.
Joining me now for some reaction is Anita Huberman, the Surrey Board of Trade President and CEO. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
What are your thoughts on this this stance? I don't agree with it, but I accept it after seemingly to fight this this transition for so long.
Well, first of all, Mayor Locke was correct in her fight to ensure that we kept the Surrey RCMP. There was no evidence that we needed a new police force. There was no reason that we needed to stop infrastructure investments to pay for an expensive police force. Really, we're always going to need the RCMP. We're a border city. And one of the things also is that it's businesses that bear the greatest burden of taxation. And yes, there was a judicial review. Yes, we have to move forward. We understand Mayor Locke's sentiments last night at the council meeting. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of things that need to be done in order for the Surrey Police Service to be the police of jurisdiction in November 2024.
You sound disappointed then.
Oh, you bet. We at the Surrey Board of Trade advocated to keep the RCMP and focus on investments that we still don't have, by the way, on wraparound support infrastructure for those that need mental health supports, youth supports, those that are drug addicted. All of these pieces, these problems still exist for the new police force that is coming into play. And the BC government really needs to come to the table to ensure that we have those wraparound support services.
How much did running both, both the transition and keeping the RCMP over the course of the opposition to this transition, how much did that cost taxpayers in Surrey?
Well, the exact amount, I don't know. I ran into the 100 million plus is what I heard. But certainly the fight was needed. I mean, this is a provincial government imposed police force. There was still, and there still isn't any evidence on why we need to shift to a new police force. So now some difficult decisions are going to need to be made by City Hall.
What are those difficult decisions?
And so they are related to future tax increases. What are the infrastructure investments that are going to be stalled as a result of paying for a very new, expensive public safety infrastructure? We're going to be the largest city in British Columbia in 5 years, and we need to focus on building and partnering on destination assets. Right now, everything, our whole economic development plan right now seems at a stall.
There was provincial funding that was promised to Surrey for this transition. My understanding from listening to Councillor Linda Annis this morning was that that would now be going directly to the transition rather than managed by the city. Is that your understanding, that there is still provincial money, the province is going to step up and help with those costs?
Well, the money that Councillor Annis spoke about this morning on CBC, yes, it is being put towards the Surrey Police Service, but it simply isn't enough. We still need to invest in training infrastructure, our vehicle infrastructure, other capital infrastructure, technology infrastructure. Where are we going to get all of the police officers that we need and that we've been shortened of over the past 5 years, and still our population continues to grow? Where are we going to get this confidence in public safety this November?
The mayor talked last night about fatigue, that she recognized that residents and taxpayers were fatigued by this ongoing, long-standing issue and debate and conflict, in fact. She said, I'm fatigued as well. Are you fatigued by this?
Well, of course. The Surrey Board of Trade is fatigued ever since this whole thing started in 2018. But the fight was meaningful. It was for the taxpayer. Again, businesses bear the greatest burden of taxation, in addition to so many other economic challenges. And so, really to enhance livability, we wanted to see other infrastructure investments and partnerships between the BC government, the federal government, and our local government. But I preface the fact that the fight had to happen. You just can't accept something just because the BC government or the federal government says it is so. It has to make sense for your city.
Okay, here we are now, though. What will the Surrey Board of Trade do to support and to ensure that the process is smooth?
Well, I think, first of all, we recognize that we have to move forward. One of the things that we will do over the summer is to ensure that we, have a relationship with the Surrey Police Service. And it has to go both ways. It has to be two-way communication to ensure that our business community knows that the Surrey Police Service is going to be there for them when they need them, and that they're going to have enough police officers in our very large geographic area, which is Surrey.
Anita Huberman, thank you so much for taking our call immediately on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anita Huberman is the president and CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. It is now 12:56 Pacific time. And again, a lot of emails on our top story today, which was the tough talk coming from Premier David Eby, saying that new funding that had been announced for Quebec and Ontario to deal with an influx of temporary migrants was coming at the cost to BC, to Western provinces, at the expense of Western provinces, rather. And he said that BC is also facing those pressures, and he's demanding similar funding. And so we're asking you, BC is BC getting its share to deal with those pressures? And what do you make of the criticism coming from Premier David Eby? Lots of emails coming in on that. Bruce wrote us in response to an earlier caller, Kelly. And so Bruce writes, I'm 76, so I'm older than him. I've seen a lot of changes in the world all those years. I can't quite figure out how someone younger seems to have an unprogressive approach to how the world will continue to change, whether he wants it or not. Other irritants suggested imply a reactionary attitude that will do little to be flexible to inevitable change, and his irritants will continue to fester while governments grapple with and try to address dozens of issues. Garnet writes, my opinion on the discrepancy of funds to the various provinces is that the federal government should supply a fixed amount for each immigrant to the province. However, this would require that the federal government do some calculations, which seems to be a big problem for them. Thank you very much for your emails. Lots more coverage on this, of course, throughout the day here on CBC.